Judge sides with white cops in court until the black woman reveals she's a U.S. attorney. They say justice is blind, but what happens when those who are meant to uphold the law let prejudice guide their eyes instead of truth? In a quiet Tennessee courtroom, a routine traffic stop spirals into a battle of wills between two white police officers and a seemingly ordinary black woman who dares to stand up for herself. One glaring problem: the judge in charge appears ready to swallow the officer's story whole. But no one in that courtroom has any idea who she really is, or the powerful twist she's about to unleash. This is a story of concealed identity, systemic bias, and the stunning turnabout that changes everything. Nathaniel Carlisle gripped the steering wheel of her grey sedan a little tighter as she spotted the welcoming sign for Shelby County, Tennessee, gliding past the passenger window. She had been driving for hours, returning to her hometown to visit her aging father, who had recently been diagnosed with an early stage of Alzheimer's. Despite the heartache looming in the near distance, a soft fondness settled in her chest. She remembered these roads from her childhood barbecue stands on the corners, hand-painted signs advertising fresh produce, and the early spring sun flickering through tall pines. Even the humid hush that wrapped around her car felt like a gentle reminder that she was home, although under grim circumstances. Yet Nathaniel knew one thing well: coming home could also mean reliving certain painful encounters from her past. Growing up in Memphis, she'd seen her father, a city bus driver for 40 years, endure countless small indignities from authorities who thought a working-class black man warranted extra scrutiny. She had vowed as a teenager that she would one day stand in a courtroom and challenge anyone who tried to bully her father or anyone like him again. At that time, it was a dream built from righteous anger, but Nathaniel had grown that spark into a full-blown career. She had studied tirelessly, earned scholarships, attended Howard University for undergrad, and later graduated from Harvard Law School with distinction. Ultimately, she'd become an assistant U.S. attorney, a role that gave her not just a seat at the table, but a measure of power to make real change. She didn't advertise her position outside of professional settings. Nathaniel always believed that true integrity wasn't about showing off your title, but about doing the job well. Still, she wasn't naive. She knew full well that if something went sideways, revealing her position could tilt a scenario in her favor if it came down to it. But that was a rare move, reserved for dire situations, or at least that's what she told herself whenever she tried to avoid the weight of her badge. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. She glanced down quickly at the name on the screen. Dad. Nathaniel felt a prick of longing and a stab of worry. Over the last few months, her father had grown more forgetful. He'd put the coffee pot in the microwave, or forgotten to lock the front door of the house. When Nathaniel suggested he move into assisted living, he had met her words with an anger and sadness she'd never seen in him before. She resolved to be calm, keep him comfortable, and get him the help he needed. As she debated whether to pick up, she realized her phone was about to slide off the passenger seat. Distracted, her eyes flickered to the phone at the same moment she noticed flashing blue lights in her rearview mirror. 2 squad cars, traveling behind her, turned on their sirens and signaled for her to pull over. Nathaniel felt a small knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. She was traveling a few miles under the speed limit, had used her turn signals. There was no obvious reason for them to stop her, at least none that she could think of. Still, Nathaniel's instincts told her this was no random friendly wave hello. She eased over to the gravel shoulder and let out a deep breath. The phone, still buzzing, went silent. She looked in the rearview mirror to catch sight of 2 white officers stepping out of their vehicles. One was short and stocky, his hair trimmed close to his scalp. The other was tall, with a noticeable scar across his cheek, peeking out just below his left eye. Both men wore stern, no-nonsense expressions. "This is new," Nathaniel whispered, trying to lighten her own tension. Her job was to deal with the aftermath of questionable police actions cases that sometimes landed on her desk at the Department of Justice. And while she had hoped never to be in the center of one, life's irony seemed to have a perverse sense of timing. Nathaniel rolled down her window, placed both hands on the steering wheel, and waited. The stocky officer, whose nameplate read Officer Hall, approached Nathaniel's window while the taller one, Officer Grady, positioned himself near the rear door on the passenger side, hand resting on his holster. Instinctively, Nathaniel's pulse quickened. She had nothing to hide, but she also knew that logic didn't always play a starring role in these situations. "License and registration," Officer Hall demanded, his voice clipped. He didn't offer a reason for the stop. Nathaniel calmly reached for her purse on the passenger seat, narrating her every movement. "Sir, I'm going to retrieve my license from my wallet," she said evenly, meeting his gaze. She had taught herself that articulating every movement could help reduce misunderstandings. Over the years, she'd heard of too many tragedies that erupted from an officer mistakenly thinking a driver was reaching for a weapon. Officer Hall peered at her with narrowed eyes. "Yes, do it slowly," he said, glancing at Officer Grady, who took a half-step forward. Nathaniel retrieved her license and the car's registration from the glove compartment. "Would you please tell me why I've been pulled over?" she asked, voice steady yet firm. Officer Hall didn't answer immediately. He scanned her license, making a show of squinting at her name. "Nathaniel Carlisle." "Where are you headed, Miss Carlisle?" "I'm driving to Memphis to see my father," Nathaniel replied. "Is there an issue, officer?" Officer Grady repositioned himself closer to the open window. Nathaniel could sense the tension vibrating in the space. The hair on the back of her neck stood up. Hall cleared his throat. "We have a report of a vehicle matching this description involved in an incident of reckless driving a few miles back," he said. There was a thin smile on his face, but Nathaniel noticed it never reached his eyes. She frowned. "There must be some confusion. I've been carefully following the speed limit. Did you see me commit any violation?" she asked. Grady stepped in. "We'll be the judge of that," he snapped. "You wouldn't be trying to hide anything, would you?" Nathaniel took a calming breath. She knew that tone, an escalation, a challenge. She forced a polite but cool smile. "Officer, I'm happy to cooperate, but I can assure you there's nothing I'm hiding." Hall shook his head. "Keep your hands where I can see them," he ordered. Then he pivoted. "We're going to have to ask you to step out of the car." "Why?" Nathaniel asked, forcing herself to remain calm. "I'm cooperating. My license and registration are valid. I have no outstanding warrants, ma'am," Hall snapped. "Step out of the vehicle now. We have probable cause to search your car." Nathaniel blinked in disbelief. "On what grounds?" she asked. "Are you suspecting me of a crime?" She knew the law intimately, but she also understood that some officers relied on intimidation, expecting civilians not to know their rights. The corners of Hall's mouth drew tight. "We don't need to discuss that here. Get out of the car." Nathaniel considered her next move carefully. Revealing she worked for the Department of Justice might escalate or diffuse the situation. The risk was that some officers saw the federal government as meddling in local affairs, and that could spark more conflict. Yet refusing to comply outright could worsen her predicament. In a calm voice, Nathaniel said, "I would like to comply, but I also want to call my attorney." Grady bristled. "Your attorney? Why do you need an attorney if you've done nothing wrong?" "Because you're demanding I get out of the car without cause, which is my right to question," Nathaniel answered. "I'm not resisting. But I have a legal right to. Before she could finish, Hall opened her car door from the outside, and Grady yanked at her arm. Nathaniel nearly stumbled out, struggling to keep her balance. The sudden aggression took her by surprise. She tried to remain steady and not lash out. "You resisting, ma'am," Grady said, his voice dripping with the threat of retribution. "No, I'm not," Nathaniel said through clenched teeth, raising her palms. "I'm fully cooperating." Hall gestured to the side of the car. "Spread your arms on the hood." Nathaniel hesitated. She'd rarely found herself physically guided by an officer, and it was an unnerving feeling. She complied, placing her hands on the hood. She could feel the heat radiating from the engine. Grady patted her down, not bothering to be gentle. As Nathaniel felt his rough handling, her mind raced with anger and confusion. She was Nathaniel Carlisle, an assistant U.S. attorney, well-versed in the constitutional boundaries of traffic stops and searches. And yet, here she was, treated like a criminal. When Grady finished, he pulled Nathaniel's hands behind her back, cuffing them. "You're being detained," he said. Shock blossomed in Nathaniel's chest. "Detained for what?" she demanded, her voice sharper than before. Hall's lips pressed into a thin line. "Reckless driving, suspicion of possible possession. We'll see once we search your car." In that moment, Nathaniel realized the next steps. She needed to be careful. These officers were either incompetent or deliberately violating her rights. She also knew she'd have her day in court if it came to that. But a quiet voice in her head said, "They don't know who you are. They think you're just another black driver. They can intimidate." Nathaniel decided to remain silent, trusting the system might correct this injustice eventually. But she also reminded herself that many times the system failed those without a voice. Her heart pounded, but she kept her face impassive. There would be time to reveal her credentials. But right now, she wasn't about to make herself a target of more hostility. Officer Grady shoved Nathaniel into the back seat of the squad car, ignoring her requests to place her seatbelt. She tried not to let fear get the best of her. She could have invoked her status right there, but something told her that these officers wouldn't react kindly, not with the mood they were in. A better place to state her position might be the station or, if it came down to it, the courtroom. She watched through the window as the two officers rummaged through her sedan, tossing the contents of her glove compartment onto the seats, flipping open her suitcase in the trunk, and sifting through her neatly packed clothes. It looked like a fishing expedition, plain and simple. Nathaniel clenched her jaw. She told herself, "You know the law. You'll use the law." Finally, Hall hopped back into the driver's seat, shaking his head. "Nothing there," he murmured. "I'm not done searching yet, though. We'll see what the dog says." A K-9 unit arrived shortly after. Nathaniel groaned inwardly, suspecting this was a tactic some officers used K-9 searches as a roundabout way of finding probable cause. She had read stories and handled some civil rights cases that mirrored this scenario alarmingly well. The K-9 sniffed around but indicated nothing. Nathaniel let out a sigh of relief, though her tension remained high. Grady and Hall stepped away for a moment, presumably to compare notes. After a brief discussion, they returned, looking annoyed. They'd come up short. Nathaniel braced herself for release, thinking maybe they'd realize they had no grounds to keep her. But instead, Officer Hall turned to her. "We're bringing you in for further questioning," he said, as if she were a suspect in some major crime. Nathaniel forced herself to remain quiet, ignoring the swirl of anger churning inside her. Let them dig their own grave, she thought. They have no idea who they're dealing with. Soon, Nathaniel found herself processed through the small local precinct, fingerprinted, photographed, and placed in a holding cell. The entire experience felt surreal. She maintained her composure, but inside she seethed at the blatant disrespect for procedure. Hours passed before an officer, different from the two who had arrested her, finally came by to speak with her. His nameplate read Sergeant Delgado. He wore a weary expression, as if he had done this routine for too long. "Ma'am, you want to call someone?" he asked, his tone surprisingly polite compared to Hall and Grady. "Yes, please," Nathaniel replied. "I'd like to contact my attorney." "Sergeant," Delgado nodded, unlocking the cell and guiding Nathaniel to a telephone. "You're being charged with reckless driving and resisting arrest," he explained, clearly reading from a file. "There's mention of possible drug possession, but it looks like nothing was found." Nathaniel inhaled sharply. "No, nothing was found because there was nothing to find," she said. "I never resisted either. May I make my phone call, or do I need to remind you that it's my constitutional right?" Sergeant Delgado arched an eyebrow. "Go ahead, ma'am." Nathaniel picked up the phone. Her first instinct was to call her friend and mentor, Cassandra Reed, a civil rights attorney in Memphis who had handled countless police misconduct cases. Cassandra was also one of the few people who knew Nathaniel's exact role at the Department of Justice. She punched in Cassandra's number. It rang 3 times. "Hello?" Cassandra's voice was warm, but laced with caution, as if she was answering a line she didn't recognize. "It's Nathaniel," she said softly. "Nathaniel. Girl, I expected you in Memphis tomorrow." "Everything all right?" Nathaniel exhaled. "Not exactly. I'm at the West Shelby County precinct." She explained the situation succinctly: the stop, the baseless search, the cuffs, the alleged charges. Cassandra cursed softly under her breath. "All right, hang tight. Don't say anything to them, aside from your request for counsel. I'm on my way." After Nathaniel hung up, Sergeant Delgado escorted her back to the holding cell. She glanced at the clock on the wall. It was nearing 9 p.m. She worried about her father waiting at home, probably wondering why she hadn't arrived yet. The dull ache of frustration gnawed at her. For the next 2 hours, Nathaniel sat on a bench, arms folded, thinking. She recalled the look on the 2 officers' faces as they rummaged through her belongings, so certain they'd find something to justify their aggression. She found a bitter humor in the fact that had they known she was a federal prosecutor, they'd have probably scurried away in fear. But Nathaniel was a principled person. She had always told herself she'd never use her position to intimidate anyone. Yet now she was seeing the other side of that coin. Not revealing her status left her vulnerable to these abuses. Finally, the clang of metal signaled the opening of the cell door. Cassandra appeared, wearing a crisp suit that bore the hallmark of a top-tier lawyer. Her expression was a cool mask of professionalism, but Nathaniel knew her friend was likely fuming inside. "They've agreed to release you on your own recognizance, pending a hearing," Cassandra said, crossing her arms. "We'll get to the bottom of this." She turned to Sergeant Delgado. "You have no legal basis to hold my client any longer." Delgado sighed. "Look, I'm just following the instructions from Officers Hall and Grady. They reported a possible reckless driving scenario," said she was resisting. Cassandra leveled him with a sharp look. "And you have no actual evidence of wrongdoing. If you charge Nathaniel, we'll see you in court with a motion to dismiss and a civil suit for wrongful arrest. Are we clear?" Delgado nodded. "She's free to go," he said simply. Nathaniel stepped out, and Cassandra placed a hand on her shoulder. "Let's get you home," her friend murmured, ushering Nathaniel toward the exit. Hall and Grady were nowhere to be seen. Perhaps they were finishing their shift or simply lying low. Nathaniel didn't care. She just wanted to get home and make sure her father was all right. Yet a slow burn of righteous anger simmered beneath her relief. She knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Officers Hall and Grady had filed false charges, and a hearing was set. Nathaniel had no illusions about how small-town politics could sometimes overshadow justice. She suspected that the local judge, whomever he or she was, might be sympathetic to the officers. That was a gamble Nathaniel was willing to take. But if it came down to it, she would reveal her status as a U.S. attorney and watch the entire charade crumble. Cassandra drove Nathaniel back to her father's home in Memphis. It was a modest single-story house where Nathaniel had grown up, complete with a small porch swing that squeaked whenever the wind rolled in. A faint porch light glimmered, suggesting her father was either waiting up or had forgotten to turn it off before going to bed. Nathaniel stepped inside quietly, the weight of the day pressing down on her. She found her father, William Carlyle, dozing in his recliner in front of a muted television. A half-empty glass of sweet tea sat on the side table. She knelt beside him, gently touching his shoulder. "Dad," she whispered. He stirred awake, blinking in confusion. "Nathaniel! You're home already?" A pang of sadness squeezed her heart. She realized he might not remember telling her to call when she arrived. She forced a gentle smile. "Yes, Dad. Sorry I'm late." She didn't mention the arrest. Her father's health was precarious enough without adding that stress. He rubbed his eyes. "You okay, Pumpkin? You look tense." Nathaniel smoothed his thinning grey hair. "I'm fine, Dad. Just a long drive. Let's get you to bed." Cassandra stood in the doorway, arms folded, a mixture of concern and sympathy etched on her face. When Nathaniel had finally tucked her father into bed, she rejoined Cassandra in the living room. Cassandra sank into the old couch, crossing her legs. "We need to talk strategy," she said in a hushed tone, mindful not to disturb Nathaniel's father. Nathaniel nodded, sitting across from her. "I figured as much. What are we dealing with?" Cassandra let out a heavy sigh. "Well, from what I gathered, they filed a police report stating that you were recklessly weaving between lanes nonsense." "I know. Then they claim you refused to cooperate and tried to flee on foot, which is why they used force." "It's all lies, Nathaniel." Rage flared in Nathaniel's chest. "I never even left the driver's seat until they forcibly pulled me out." "I know," Cassandra said. "They're counting on one thing, their word against yours, plus any possible dashcam footage they might selectively edit or lose." She shrugged grimly. "You know how these cases can go." Nathaniel nodded. She was intimately familiar with how these things unraveled in court. A lot would hinge on the judge, any potential evidence the police department might produce or hide, and the officer's own testimony. "So, how do we handle the hearing?" Nathaniel asked. "I'll file motions to get the dashcam footage immediately," Cassandra said. "We'll also request any bodycam footage. If they have it, it should exonerate you. If they don't, that raises questions about why they didn't activate their cameras." Nathaniel considered her next words carefully. "Cassandra," she said, leaning forward, "I'm prepared to reveal my role as an assistant U.S. attorney if it comes to that. But I want to see if they'll tell the truth first." Cassandra's eyes widened in admiration and concern. "That's risky. If you tell them up front, it might make them back off or try to bury the evidence even deeper." Nathaniel pressed her lips together. "Exactly. I want to see them commit to their story in front of the judge. Let them lie under oath." Cassandra let out a slow exhale. "This could get ugly, Nathaniel." Nathaniel's eyes flashed. "I know, but I've dealt with ugly before. These officers made a grave mistake. They'll learn soon enough." Cassandra nodded. "All right. I'll prep the motions tomorrow morning. The hearing is set for next week, so we have time to gather everything we need. In the meantime, you just focus on your dad." Nathaniel forced a smile, grateful for her friend's support. She walked Cassandra to the door, giving her a tight hug. Thank you, she said softly. For everything. Cassandra squeezed her back. We'll see justice done, she whispered. Count on it. Over the next few days, Nathaniel balanced her time between caring for her father and consulting with Cassandra on the legal front. William Carlyle's memory lapses seemed to be worsening, and Nathaniel worried about leaving him alone if the hearing became lengthy or complicated. One afternoon, as Nathaniel was sorting through old photos in an attempt to jog her father's memories, pictures of her graduation from Howard University, of her father on the porch with Nathaniel's mother before she passed away, she heard the phone ring. She picked it up to find a trembling male voice on the other end. Is this Miss Carlyle? Yes, Nathaniel replied, unsure who was calling. This is Officer Grady, came the stunned reply. Nathaniel froze for a moment, her knuckles whitening around the receiver. Officer Grady, the tall policeman with the scar. She forced herself to remain calm. How did you get this number? She asked evenly. He let out a shaky breath. It's in the police report. I just wanted to call. Nathaniel suppressed a flare of anger. Go on. You know, things might go easier for everyone if you just let this go, Grady said. His words were halting, as if he was carefully measuring each phrase. We might talk to the judge, reduce any charges, or have them dropped altogether. This doesn't have to get messy. A wave of disgust rolled through Nathaniel. Are you suggesting I drop my defense in exchange for you dropping fabricated charges against me? She asked icily. I'm saying, maybe you don't want to push this. People see all sorts of outcomes in these small towns. Judges don't always side with outsiders, Grady replied with a forced mildness. Nathaniel inhaled sharply. I grew up in Memphis, Officer Grady, not far from your precinct. I'm hardly an outsider. He cleared his throat. That's not what I meant. Look, we can keep this quiet. No reason for you to stir up trouble. Nathaniel felt her heart pounding. She had come across many forms of intimidation in her line of work, but rarely so blatant. I have every reason to pursue justice, officer. You and your partner violated my rights. There was a brief pause. Then I guess we'll see you in court, he said finally, his tone hardening. The line went dead. Nathaniel stared at the phone for several moments, a nauseating mix of fear and anger knotting in her stomach. The call was a stark reminder that Hall and Grady wouldn't simply roll over and admit fault. They intended to push this through, using every tactic at their disposal. She immediately dialed Cassandra, recounting the call word for word. He basically tried to intimidate me into dropping the case, Nathaniel concluded. Cassandra was silent for a moment. That's witness tampering or intimidation, Nathaniel. That's serious business. We can request additional legal remedies, maybe even contact the Department of Justice directly, if you want to take it that far. Nathaniel chewed her lip. She wanted to handle this as a normal citizen first, out of principle. But the reality was that Grady was playing dirty. Maybe it's time to let them know exactly who they're messing with, Nathaniel thought. But no, she wanted them to perjure themselves first, or attempt some other shady maneuver in open court. Then she'd strike. Let's keep that card close to our chest for now, Nathaniel said. But get a record of this phone call. We might need it. Cassandra agreed, and they ended the call with Nathaniel more determined than ever to see this through. The morning of the preliminary hearing arrived with an overcast sky, the kind of gloom that felt like a set piece in a dramatic play. Nathaniel stood in front of the mirror, adjusting a simple black blazer over her white blouse. Her father, uncertain of what was happening, wished her luck with a faint smile. Cassandra picked her up, and they drove to the Shelby County Courthouse in near silence. Nathaniel tried to mentally prepare herself. She was used to courtrooms, It was practically her second home in her professional life. But this time, she wasn't the prosecutor standing behind the government's table. She was the defendant, facing false charges. They entered the courthouse, a squat building with chipped beige paint and security cameras. The hallway smelled of old carpet and stale coffee. Nathaniel's stomach fluttered with a mix of nerves and righteous anger. She had never been in the hot seat like this. She typically sat on the other side, questioning witnesses and presenting evidence to a judge. They walked into the courtroom, a modest chamber with wood-paneled walls and worn benches. A few early morning spectators milled about. At the front, Nathaniel noticed the presiding judge for the day was Harold Montgomery, a lean man in his 60s with a reputation for being tough on defendants. Nathaniel knew the type, old guard, conservative, possibly carrying decades of ingrained biases. Officers Hall and Grady arrived a short while later, exchanging nods with the bailiff. Hall's eyes flickered toward Nathaniel, a smug grin curling on his lips. Grady wore a tight-lipped expression, one that Nathaniel recognized from the phone. He was nervous, but determined to push forward. Cassandra leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "Let's see what they say." When the case was called, Nathaniel and Cassandra approached the defense table. Hall and Grady, along with the assistant district attorney, stood on the other side. Judge Montgomery scanned the paperwork in front of him and cleared his throat. Case number 24567, State of Tennessee versus Nathaniel Carlisle. Charges: reckless driving and resisting arrest, he read, adjusting his glasses. He looked at Nathaniel. "How do you plead?" Cassandra answered. "Not guilty, Your Honor. We also have motions to dismiss, as well as a request for immediate discovery of dashcam and any bodycam footage." The ADA, a young man named Jared Wilcox, responded, "Your Honor, the state will be ready to proceed with evidence and witness testimony. We object to a premature motion to dismiss." Judge Montgomery looked over the top of his glasses. "We'll hear the state's witnesses. Officers Hall and Grady, correct?" Hall was first to take the stand, strutting forward as if anticipating a triumphant moment. He swore to tell the truth and sat down, gaze occasionally drifting to Nathaniel with a faint smirk. Wilcox guided the questioning. "Officer Hall, can you recount the events of the evening in question?" Hall launched into a rehearsed narrative. "Yes, sir. My partner and I observed Miss Carlisle's vehicle weaving between lanes. We attempted a traffic stop. She initially refused to pull over, but eventually did. When we approached, she became belligerent. She wouldn't hand over her license, kept reaching for something. We feared for our safety." Nathaniel seethed quietly. None of that was true. But she kept her composure, scribbling notes on a legal pad as Cassandra had instructed her. Hall continued. "We asked her to step out of the vehicle. She refused. She then opened the door and tried to run. Officer Grady had to restrain her. We suspected narcotics, so we conducted a search." Cassandra's eyes flickered with contempt. It was all lies. She asked Nathaniel for permission with a glance, and Nathaniel nodded, letting her friend cross-examine. "Officer Hall," Cassandra began, "you said you observed Miss Carlisle weaving. Do you have any dashcam footage or evidence to confirm this?" Hall's jaw tightened. "Our dashcam malfunctioned that night. Technical difficulties." Cassandra nodded slowly, feigning a thoughtful expression. "I see. And you mentioned Miss Carlisle tried to flee. Is there bodycam footage?" Hall shifted in his seat. "Our department doesn't currently have bodycams for every officer." Cassandra's face remained impassive. "And you stated Miss Carlisle kept reaching for something which caused you to fear for your safety. Were you able to identify what she was reaching for?" Hall shrugged. "Seemed like a weapon turned out not to be. Cassandra pressed forward. And that suspicion led you to handcuff her and search her vehicle? Yes. Cassandra paused, then delivered her next question calmly. Officer Hall, in your report, you stated that Miss Carlyle physically resisted arrest, which you claim justifies the resisting arrest charge. Can you describe exactly how she resisted? Hall's eyes flicked to Nathaniel. She shoved me when I tried to pull her out of the car. That was new. Nathaniel fought the urge to shout. Cassandra raised an eyebrow. Did she injure you in any way? Hall shook his head. Not exactly, but it was enough to justify the use of handcuffs. Cassandra nodded, stepping back. No further questions at this time, Your Honor. Next, Officer Grady took the stand, offering a story that matched Hall's but included a few conflicting details. He claimed Nathaniel was shouting profanities at them, which Nathaniel never did, and that she appeared to reach under her seat for something. When Cassandra cross-examined him, she pointed out discrepancies in the times he mentioned, minor differences in the alleged verbal altercations, and inconsistencies with Hall's version about the exact moment Nathaniel supposedly tried to run. Still, Nathaniel noted that the judge seemed unperturbed by the contradictions. He scribbled a few notes, but his expression remained neutral. Cassandra concluded. No further questions. Wilcox, the ADA, then stated, Your Honor, based on the officer's testimony, the state believes the charges should proceed to trial. Cassandra stood. We'd like to call Miss Carlyle to the stand, Your Honor, if you please. Judge Montgomery nodded. Nathaniel felt a swirl of anxiety in her stomach, but she stood, walked to the witness stand, and took the oath. Cassandra approached gently. Miss Carlyle, did you at any point weave between lanes or drive recklessly? No, I did not, Nathaniel answered firmly. Did you attempt to flee the officers? No, I pulled over promptly when they signaled. I remained in the car until they forcibly removed me. Did you shove Officer Hall? No. He yanked me out of the car, nearly causing me to lose my balance. Cassandra nodded. Were you carrying any narcotics or weapons? Absolutely not. Thank you, Miss Carlyle. Cassandra turned to the judge. I have no further questions. ADA Wilcox stepped forward. Miss Carlyle, you appear to have a law enforcement background. Any reason you're so knowledgeable about protocol? Nathaniel tensed. He might suspect something, but she answered carefully. I have a background in law, she said plainly. Wilcox tilted his head. Would you care to elaborate? Cassandra objected on relevance, but Nathaniel shook her head slightly, indicating she wanted to answer. The judge overruled the objection, curious as well. I'm a practicing attorney, Nathaniel said. Wilcox waited, as if expecting more. That's all. I see. He backed off, perhaps satisfied that Nathaniel was just a typical local lawyer. He concluded his questions, and Nathaniel stepped down. Judge Montgomery leaned back in his chair, flipping through the file. He pursed his lips. I've heard both sides. The officer's testimony is consistent enough to suggest probable cause, while Miss Carlyle denies their account. Cassandra stepped forward. Your Honor, we respectfully request the case be dismissed for lack of evidence. The officers claim the dashcam malfunctioned, no bodycam is available, and there are clear inconsistencies. Judge Montgomery held up a hand. Let me finish. I find that the case should proceed to a formal trial. We'll set a date in 3 weeks. Motions for discovery can be filed in the interim. Nathaniel's heart sank. The judge's expression made it evident he was inclined to trust the officers. She heard Hall stifle a triumphant snort. Cassandra tried to argue. Your Honor, we also have reason to believe the officers engaged in misconduct. Montgomery cut her off. That's for the trial to determine. For now, Miss Carlyle remains out on bail. Court is adjourned. He banged the gavel. Nathaniel felt a surge of frustration and helplessness. She exchanged a look with Cassandra, who seemed equally vexed by the judge's apparent partiality. As everyone began filtering out, Nathaniel noticed Hall and Grady exchange self-congratulatory smiles with each other and a friendly nod with the judge. Small towns, Nathaniel thought bitterly. She and Cassandra gathered their files in silence, the tension palpable. They exited the courtroom, stepping into the hallway. Cassandra hissed under her breath. He's obviously siding with them. This is going to be an uphill battle. Nathaniel exhaled. Let them keep lying. If it goes to trial, so be it. We have time to gather more evidence. Maybe we can find a witness who saw the traffic stop. Cassandra nodded. I'm going to put my team on it. We'll knock on doors near where you got pulled over. Maybe someone filmed it on their phone. Nathaniel's mind churned with possibilities. In the back of her mind, she also recognized she had a direct line to the Department of Justice if needed, but she still wasn't ready to play that card. Something in her wanted to see how deep this cover-up would go before she pulled out the ultimate trump. Days turned to weeks as Cassandra's small legal team scoured the area near the traffic stop. They knocked on the doors of run-down houses, gas stations, and local shops, looking for anyone who might have witnessed Nathaniel's arrest. Most people had seen nothing or were unwilling to talk. One store owner recalled seeing flashing lights but didn't pay attention to the interaction. Meanwhile, Nathaniel devoted her time to caring for her father and preparing for the upcoming trial. At night, she'd sift through law books, though she hardly needed them. It was second nature to her. She was more concerned about the possibility of the judge ignoring any exculpatory evidence. Then a breakthrough came. Cassandra burst into Nathaniel's father's house one afternoon, nearly breathless from excitement. I got a call from a teenager named Aaron who claims he took a cell phone video of you being arrested. Nathaniel's eyes widened. Did he send it? Cassandra nodded, fumbling with her phone. He emailed it to me. Let's see. She clicked on an attachment, and the screen showed a shaky, low-light video. The vantage point appeared to be from the sidewalk across the street, partially blocked by a fence, but Nathaniel could see the faint outline of her car and the police lights. The footage was short, about 30 seconds, but it clearly showed Nathaniel standing with her hands in the air before Hall and Grady yanked her arms behind her back. There was no sign of Nathaniel trying to flee or shove them. The audio was muffled, but it was obvious she was speaking calmly. Nathaniel felt relief wash over her. It wasn't the clearest video, but it was enough to contradict the officer's claims. "This is huge," she whispered. Cassandra grinned. "We'll authenticate it, submit it as evidence, and see if that changes the state's tune. If the judge still pushes for trial, this might sway a jury." Nathaniel replayed the short clip. She saw herself in the moment, a swirl of adrenaline and fear, and it reignited her anger. The officers had lied so brazenly, counting on the judge to take their word over hers. Well, now we have proof, Nathaniel thought. Cassandra wasted no time filing the video evidence with the court, along with a motion for dismissal or a summary judgment in Nathaniel's favor. Within days, they received a notice that the judge had scheduled a pre-trial hearing to consider the new evidence. The day of the pre-trial hearing arrived. Nathaniel and Cassandra sat at the defense table, the video ready to be played on a large monitor. The ADA, Wilcox, looked uneasy, shuffling papers. Hall and Grady, seated behind him, glanced at each other nervously. The tension in the air was almost tangible. When the hearing commenced, Cassandra presented the video evidence. She explained how the footage came from a bystander who'd emailed it anonymously and later came forward to confirm its authenticity. Judge Montgomery leaned forward, brow furrowed, as the video played. On screen, Nathaniel was seen clearly standing still, with her hands visible. The audio was faint, but at no point did Nathaniel appear aggressive or belligerent. Cassandra paused the video. "Your Honor, this directly contradicts the officer's sworn statements that Miss Carlyle attempted to flee or assaulted them." Judge Montgomery looked toward Hall and Grady. "Officers, care to explain this?" Hall cleared his throat, beads of sweat forming on his brow. "The video doesn't show the entire incident, Your Honor. It only shows a brief clip. Before that, she was resisting." Grady chimed in, "Yes, sir. She tried to push past me, but the video doesn't capture that." Cassandra's expression was steely. "You've claimed your dashcam was malfunctioning, so we have no police footage to confirm your version. But this clip shows Miss Carlyle standing calmly exactly when you claim she was resisting. Wilcox, looking trapped, tried to salvage the prosecution's case. Your Honor, the video might be incomplete. We'd need to see more before making a final determination." Montgomery tapped his pen against the desk, thinking. Nathaniel's heart pounded, waiting to see if the judge would still back the officers or consider the truth. After a tense silence, the judge spoke. "Officers, if the rest of the footage exonerates you, why not produce your dashcam recordings, malfunction or not? Are there any other witnesses to corroborate your version?" Hall and Grady exchanged glances. "We didn't have any other witnesses," Hall mumbled. The judge turned to Wilcox. "Mr. Wilcox, the state's case seems to rest on contradictory statements. This new evidence is troubling for the credibility of your officers." Wilcox shifted uncomfortably. "We'd still like to proceed to trial, Your Honor. The full facts can be explored before a jury." Cassandra cut in, voice firm. "We believe the state is harassing my client with baseless charges, and we request a dismissal." Montgomery exhaled. "I'm not prepared to dismiss yet, but this is a strong piece of evidence for the defense. We'll allow the trial to proceed. The jury can decide which side is credible." Nathaniel felt frustration spike again, but it was tempered with a slight sense of victory. The judge hadn't dismissed the case, but neither had he openly supported the officers as before. He seemed more uncertain. As they adjourned, Nathaniel shot a quick glance at Hall and Grady. They looked rattled, but not defeated. Something told Nathaniel they might double down, perhaps come up with additional false statements to patch the holes in their story. The trial date loomed closer. Nathaniel's nerves were fraying, partly from stress and partly from the emotional drain of caring for her father. His memory continued to slip, and some mornings he struggled to recognize her. She felt torn between her duty to him and her need to clear her own name. Meanwhile, Cassandra's legal team discovered more evidence, a 911 dispatch record showing no mention of Nathaniel's car being reported for reckless driving around that time. It contradicted the officers' claim that they had responded to a complaint about Nathaniel's driving. Late one night, as Nathaniel was reviewing trial notes, her phone rang. She answered, expecting to hear Cassandra's voice. Instead, she heard heavy breathing. "Hello?" Nathaniel said, dread creeping into her tone. A rasping voice spoke. "You should have left well enough alone. I know who you are." Nathaniel's pulse quickened. "Who is this?" The call disconnected. Nathaniel stared at her phone, heart thudding. "I know who you are." That could mean they'd learned of her position as an assistant U.S. attorney, or it could just be intimidation. She immediately called Cassandra, voice trembling. "I just got a threatening call," Nathaniel said. "He said I know who you are. Could be Hall or Grady or someone else at the precinct." Cassandra's tone was grim. "We need to inform the court and maybe contact your superiors at the DOJ." Nathaniel closed her eyes, thoughts swirling. She had wanted to keep her professional identity under wraps until the moment was right. But the threats were escalating. Maybe it's time to pull rank and shut this down. She took a deep breath. Let's see if anything else happens. The trial's in a week. I'll reveal my position if I need to. But first, let them lie in open court. Cassandra agreed, but Nathaniel sensed her friend's worry. This is bigger than a routine traffic stop, Nathaniel thought. Someone wants to protect these officers. Or maybe the entire department. She decided that if another threat came, she'd call the U.S. Attorney's office in Memphis. She had allies in high places. Her direct boss, U.S. Attorney Russell Harrington, was known for cracking down on police misconduct. Nathaniel knew if Harrington got wind of this, he'd swoop in with the full force of federal authority. But Nathaniel's pride also held her back. I can handle this, she insisted to herself, though a flicker of doubt sparked in her mind. The day of the trial arrived beneath a stormy sky, lightning flickering in the distance. The courthouse was buzzing with quiet tension as Nathaniel and Cassandra settled at the defense table. This time, Nathaniel wore a navy blue blazer, her posture rigid but composed. A small jury had been selected, 10 local citizens and 2 alternates. Nathaniel scanned their faces, wondering if they could see the truth through the swirling cloud of intimidation and lies. Wilcox opened the prosecution's case by calling Hall and Grady to the stand again. They repeated their fabricated story, though now it was slightly modified to align with the video footage. They admitted Nathaniel was standing still in that specific moment, but insisted that mere seconds before, she had attempted to run. Cassandra dissected their testimony on cross-examination, highlighting contradictions, drawing attention to the missing dashcam footage and reminding them of the 911 dispatch record that showed no calls regarding Nathaniel's car. Under Cassandra's relentless questioning, Hall lost his cool. He blurted out, she was being uppity, acting like she was above the law. We had every right to. He caught himself too late. The courtroom fell silent. Cassandra arched an eyebrow. Uppity, Officer Hall? Could you clarify what you mean? Hall's face reddened. I mean, she refused to follow instructions. Cassandra didn't press the racial undertone explicitly, but it was clearly hanging in the air for the jury to note. Next, Wilcox tried to introduce some tangential evidence about Nathaniel's driving record, which was spotless except for a minor parking ticket from years ago. The judge sustained Cassandra's objection, noting its irrelevance. As the prosecution rested, Nathaniel felt they'd failed to present any credible evidence linking her to any wrongdoing. But she also knew how biases worked. Juries sometimes gave police officers the benefit of the doubt. It was Cassandra's turn to present Nathaniel's defense. She called Nathaniel to the stand once more, walking her through the events. Nathaniel remained calm, recounting how she had cooperated until forcibly removed from the vehicle. Next, Cassandra introduced Aaron, the teenager who'd filmed the video. He was nervous, shifting in his seat, but he confirmed he had been walking home from a friend's house when he saw the traffic stop. He recorded it because, in his words, it looked wrong, like she wasn't doing anything but they were being rough with her. The video was played again, this time accompanied by Aaron's testimony. It visibly impacted several jury members who watched closely. Finally, Cassandra paused, then gestured toward Nathaniel. Miss Carlyle, you mentioned you have a background in law? Nathaniel nodded, feeling her pulse quicken. This was the moment she'd been waiting for. Yes, I do, she said, leaning into the microphone. Could you please state your current occupation for the record? Nathaniel drew a breath. I'm an assistant United States attorney in the Western District of Tennessee, working under U.S. Attorney Russell Harrington. A hush fell over the courtroom. Hall and Grady paled. Judge Montgomery's eyes widened. Wilcox Looked like he'd been punched in the gut, Nathaniel continued, her voice steady. I've served in that capacity for 5 years now. My duties include prosecuting federal crimes and, in some cases, investigating allegations of civil rights violations, including those involving law enforcement. Cassandra let the moment hang in the air. So you are intimately familiar with the legal standards for traffic stops, searches, and arrests? Yes, Nathaniel said, and I can say with full confidence that these officers violated my rights. Murmurs rippled through the jury and the small crowd gathered in the pews. Hall and Grady looked furious, whispering furiously to each other. Wilcox stood abruptly, objecting. This is prejudicial. Her occupation shouldn't influence the jury's decision about whether she committed reckless driving. Cassandra responded calmly. It goes to credibility, Your Honor, and to her knowledge of proper police procedure. The prosecution tried to paint her as uncooperative and ignorant of the law. We're simply correcting the record. Judge Montgomery pinched the bridge of his nose, clearly irritated. He overruled Wilcox's objection. Continue, Miss Carlyle. Nathaniel elaborated. I didn't initially disclose my job because I didn't want special treatment. I wanted to be treated like any ordinary citizen. Sadly, I was subjected to harassment and false allegations. Cassandra ended with a resolute statement. No further questions. The defense rests, Your Honor. Closing arguments commenced. Wilcox tried to salvage the prosecution's case, insisting there was a missing piece to the video, but he seemed flustered, aware that Nathaniel's testimony as a U.S. attorney had turned the tide. Cassandra delivered a powerful closing, highlighting the blatant inconsistencies and the video evidence. The jury deliberated for several hours. Nathaniel waited in a tense hush, the weight of the entire ordeal pressing down on her. Finally, the bailiff announced the jury had reached a verdict. In a packed courtroom, the foreperson stood and read out, "On the charge of reckless driving, we find the defendant not guilty. On the charge of resisting arrest, we find the defendant not guilty." A wave of relief washed over Nathaniel, nearly making her knees buckle. Cassandra grabbed her arm, steadying her. The judge thanked the jury and dismissed them. Case closed. But Nathaniel wasn't finished. She exchanged a look with Cassandra, then stepped forward. "Your Honor, if I may." Judge Montgomery, looking weary, nodded. "Go ahead, Miss Carlyle." Nathaniel's voice resonated through the chamber. "I intend to file a civil lawsuit against Officers Hall and Grady for false arrest and violation of my civil rights. I also plan to refer this matter to the Department of Justice for a formal investigation into their actions and the conduct of this precinct." A ripple of shock coursed through the room. Hall and Grady shot up from their seats, anger etched into their faces. Their expressions were a cocktail of fear and disbelief. Montgomery tried to maintain composure. "Miss Carlyle, the trial is concluded. Any civil action is beyond this court's scope today." Nathaniel nodded. "Understood, Your Honor. I simply wanted to state my intentions for the record." In the weeks that followed, Nathaniel kept her word. With Cassandra's help, she filed a civil lawsuit against Hall, Grady, and the city for wrongful arrest and civil rights violations. She also contacted her boss, U.S. Attorney Russell Harrington, who was appalled at what had happened. Harrington authorized a federal investigation. The justice system ground into motion. Internal Affairs launched a probe into Hall and Grady's history of stops and arrests. The press caught wind of the story. A local news station picked it up, headlining, "Local officers sued by Assistant U.S. Attorney for wrongful arrest." Hall and Grady faced increasing scrutiny. Their peers distanced themselves, and rumors swirled about other questionable arrests they'd made. A departmental review uncovered multiple complaints lodged against them by citizens who claimed the officers used excessive force or filed dubious charges. As the investigation deepened, the city realized they were on the hook for potential massive damages. City officials pressured the police chief, who suspended both officers. Word on the street was that the district attorney was considering dropping Hall and Grady from any pending cases to avoid credibility issues. Soon, Hall and Grady found themselves testifying before a federal grand jury. Nathaniel, though not directly involved in that part of the process, knew the wheels of justice were turning. She heard from Cassandra that Hall and Grady were indicted on charges of perjury and civil rights violations, given the evidence that they had systematically fabricated incidents for personal gain or to meet quotas. When the trial for the civil suit finally arrived, Nathaniel provided her testimony. Cassandra presented the cell phone video, the threatening phone call, the contradictory police reports. The city, seeing the writing on the wall, offered a substantial settlement to avoid a protracted legal battle. Nathaniel accepted on one condition: a public apology and the implementation of new training protocols at the precinct. The city complied. Hall and Grady's careers were effectively over, their faces plastered on local news segments, labeled as examples of law enforcement gone wrong. Nathaniel felt a grim satisfaction. This wasn't just retribution, but a safeguard for future citizens who might have otherwise fallen victim to their tactics. Months after the dust settled, Nathaniel found herself back in Memphis to check on her father and handle some final paperwork related to the settlement. She sat on the porch, swing outside her childhood home, gently swaying with the breeze. Her father dozed inside, oblivious to the legal storm that had come and gone. Cassandra joined her, sipping sweet tea. The two friends sat in companionable silence for a while before Cassandra spoke. "You did it, Nathaniel. You stood your ground. You set a precedent that might help others." Nathaniel gazed at the setting sun. "I just did what I had to do," she said quietly. "But maybe it'll make some officers think twice before they try to fabricate charges on someone they believe is powerless." Cassandra gave a small nod. "That's progress. Even if it's just one precinct's new training protocol, that's something." Nathaniel let out a long breath. She thought back to the day she was dragged out of her car, hands cuffed, fear coursing through her veins. She felt a sense of closure now, though the memory still stung. "What's next?" Cassandra asked. Nathaniel turned to her, eyes resolute. "I go back to work. Keep doing what I do, holding people accountable, making sure justice is served. And maybe, from time to time, I'll check in on Shelby County to ensure the changes we fought for actually take root." Cassandra grinned. "Sounds like a plan." Nathaniel smiled softly. She knew the fight against injustice was far from over, but for this battle, at least, she had emerged victorious. The small arcs of personal triumph, fused with the broader mission of civil rights, a reminder that one person, armed with the truth, could bend the arc of justice just a little further toward the light. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the corridors of blind prejudice and the electrifying power of truth. Nathaniel's ordeal reveals just how critical it is to know your rights and to stand up when they're violated. No one imagined that the woman in that lonely jail cell was actually a U.S. attorney, someone with the courage and authority to hold corrupt officers to account. In the end, karma hit back hard, ensuring justice prevailed where it seemed least likely. If you found this story inspiring, dramatic, or even infuriating, please hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to this channel for more stories that champion truth, resilience, and the power of standing strong. Your support helps us bring real-life lessons and gripping narratives to light. Together, let's keep that flame of justice burning bright. Thank you for watching.